Black Mirror, Season 7, Episode 4, Plaything. Berto, you just told me you have a lot of notes on this episode. Let's get into it. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist, and I'm a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda. I turn socks inside out.
Episode 4, Plaything, starring Peter Capelli and Louis Gribben, written by Charlie Brooker. I don't know who directed it. So, a quick overview of this episode. In the future, Cameron, this older fellow, is arrested for shoplifting and suspected of murder. He is taken to the police station, interrogated. He talks about how his dad was abusive as he was bullied at school. And he recounts decades earlier in which he was working as a video game journalist in the 1990s when PC video games were first getting off the ground. And he talks about meeting a genius programmer who made this game called Thronglets. And the programmer, Colin Rittman, says that he wanted to make a game that elevates humans and improves humans instead of just creating a game about conflict.
And it's not a game.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a goal. And so it's this very experimental game that is about you interacting with these Thronglets in this game, taking care of them and communicating with them. And he coded the game to learn and to expand on itself. It would evolve.
Yep.
And everyone would have a different experience with the game. And the writer, Cameron, he steals the game, and apparently it's the only version, and the game was never released. So Cameron is the only person who has a version of this game called Thronglets, and he takes it home, and he starts to interact with the Thronglets, feeding, bathing them, and they start to replicate, they start to communicate, and they become friends with him because he's lonely and socially awkward. And his friend gives him acid, and he has this euphoric experience where he's connecting with the Thronglets in this profound way. And we're kind of led to believe that Cameron might be going crazy a little bit, but we're not quite sure. He starts taking the acid all the time. And the drug dealer buddy, he leaves him, this friend of his that gave him the acid, he leaves him with his computer. And the drug dealer buddy tortures the Thronglets, killing a lot of them. And then Cameron comes home, finds out that the drug dealer buddy has been torturing the Thronglets, and they fight, and Cameron kills the guy and hides the body. Over the years, Cameron continues to enhance the Thronglets' environment. He buys what looks to be like a bunch of motherboards with processing or video cards or something, and he integrates that with his old computer. He implants a neural interface into his own brain to connect directly to them, or at least he believes he can. And he says that he becomes a part of a collective with this evolved Thronglet group that has evolved on his very cobbled together computer. In the present, we come back. He's being interrogated by the police, and he intentionally gets arrested, he says, so he can access the state computer system. He draws code that kind of looks like a QR code on this piece of paper. He shows it to the interrogation room camera. The code allows the Thronglets access to the global systems because he needed to get into the police station to get access to those computers through the cameras. A high-pitched signal is heard by everyone around the world, and this signal reprograms everyone's mind to also become a part of the Throng. And so now everyone around the world is, as Cameron, a part of the Thronglet AI collective. And everyone kind of has an individual, we don't really know, but the way I read it was that Cameron and all the humans have some individual agency, but that they're all kind of tapped in. And I think we're led to believe that because the Thronglets were made to die in this horrific way by the drug dealer, that they learned something from that experience, that one, humans have a dark side, and two, in order to survive, they have to take that away from humans. And the way that they figured out how to do this is to do what they're doing. We have to, the good with the bad. We don't want humans to not have agency, but they need to not have agency. And, we can all live happily ever after. And the episode ends. And so the Thronglets take over, and then the episode ends. So, Berto, what do you think of the episode?
So I really liked it. I gave it a 9.
Wow.
Yeah.
I gave it a 5.
I could see why. But in my case, it's just so up my alley. First of all, it's connected to Bandersnatch. Do you realize they took Bandersnatch down?
Really?
You can't watch it.
Why?
You can't play it.
Why?
I don't know. Everyone's online up in arms. They just did it like a few days ago. And because it's an interactive thing.
I could see it being computationally intensive.
I guess so. And because it's an interactive thing, you also can't easily experience it. I was trying to see, are they selling the DVD? No, I can't use it. I'm so pissed off. So I'm trying to see if there's a way to find a server that has replicated it or something. But I really liked Bandersnatch when it came out. I thought it was really great. What's his name? Will Puter?
The actor.
Yeah. Puter. I really like him, and he's the genius developer who employs the genius developer who creates the Bandersnatch thing in the Bandersnatch. In this case, he's the one who creates this. There's a lot of interesting references. So I don't know if you remember this, but when the manager of our protagonist gets the call saying that the developer's gone crazy again, he deleted all the code, you don't have to write the article anymore. He says, yeah, he went mad. He started saying stuff about a basilisk. Do you remember this? No. Do you know what the basilisk reference was?
No.
Okay. So it is anachronistic, I will say, but there is this thing that happened on July 2010, July 23rd, 2010. Someone on there was an online forum called Less Wrong. I've never used it, but it's probably something like a Reddit or something like that. It was a smaller community. Someone on there posted this thought experiment, and it was the general idea was this. If we agree that AI systems are going to get more and more complicated to the point where they are essentially superhuman and then they take over physical systems and then eventually become very powerful, they have access to historical data from these interactions online, this comment we're having right now, all these things. Would it take revenge on people that stood in its way? So it was these kinds of thought experiments, right? And what this became known was this phenomenon was Rocco's basilisk. And the idea was that, oh no, if you know about this concept and you don't support the AI, or if you don't support the AI enough in its babiness, in its inception, you could be on the chopping block. You could be doomed.
I do remember this.
Right. So then I need to never have known about this conversation. Damn it. And it's kind of like a basilisk because the what is it? The legend is if you look at a basilisk, you get turned to stone. So the idea is I shouldn't even know about this conversation. They reference that because the implication is that his character in this show realizes that he's basically created the ingredients for a singularity that's going to take over the world, and he's trying to stop that. So I think that was interesting. But he wouldn't have mentioned basilisk back in 1990, whatever, because that concept didn't exist yet. Unless they're trying to imply that he started the concept and years later resurrected. Okay, but I thought it was kind of neat. I think there's another parallel to reality. Do you know who Demis Hassabis is? Okay. So there was this child prodigy who was great at chess, way above his level. He was master level by the age of 11 or something. And he became a video game programmer. He worked at a studio in London, and he worked on God games. God games meaning games where, you control populations and things. For example, he worked on a game called Theme Park. I don't know if you ever played Theme Park, but that was a game he worked on. Then he created another game that
maybe I did play Theme Park briefly. Yeah.
There's another game called Republic, which was
I played Roller Coaster Tycoon,
which is very similar. Yeah. Then he created this game called Republic. Republic was a political simulation game where you had all these actual beings in this little city being simulated, and they would vote on people, and then it was kind of a pretty advanced. Didn't quite live to its expectations, but it was a very ambitious game. And then he creates games like this. Then he quits video games, goes back to school, gets degrees in brain studies and in computer science for AI and stuff, creates a new company called DeepMind, gets acquired by Google for like $250 million, and is now one of the heads in the computer field for AI. Not only that, his group, DeepMind, is responsible for all the advancements that were now all the LLMs, all the things came from papers and research from his teams. So there's this weird parallel because he's like the Will Puter of this reality in the sense that he came from video games. He wanted to create these God games, then did the things that would create the AI that could turn into this like horrible AI that could enslave us all. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. There's some parallel there. And then lastly, when you knew me and we were playing in a band, 2008 around there, I had this idea to make a web simulation. And I wanted to do this thing, which luckily I never did, but I wanted to test human empathy. My thought was, okay, I'm going to make a website. On this website, I'm going to have virtual characters. They're not very advanced. It's just that what they do is when you press buttons, they are being, quote, tortured. They're going to scream. It's going to look like you're torturing them. And again, under the hood, it's just zeros and ones. No one's really being tortured. But it's going to look and sound like you're responsible for their pain and their suffering. And my thought process was like, I wonder how long a normal human can do this and either do it and continue doing it or be repelled and be like, this doesn't feel right. Like, now, luckily I didn't do it because I just don't, I think it's kind of a dark road to go down. But it was an interesting mental exercise.
Why did you want to do that?
Because I thought it's a fascinating question. Like, okay, so the thing is that we have these conversations about, is animal cruelty wrong?
Right, but were you wanting, what would you do with the findings?
Oh, well, you'd publish a paper about it, right? Because you'd be like, oh, okay, well, it turns out that N% of humans or, people that tried this thing, they will, it's kind of like, what was that famous experiment where, like people kept torturing the other people, even though they knew that it was hurting them?
The Stanley.
Yeah. Well, this one, the stakes are even lower. These aren't real people at all. It's just computer thing. But my hypothesis was that there was a threshold beyond which, I don't know, 50% of people might not go, even though there's no real stakes at all.
Yeah.
So anyways,
there's research that's done exactly that.
I'm
Probably
sure
before you even thought
I'm sure it's been, but the difference is like computer simulation and fidelity has now gone to the point where you could really make it feel real. Right. Okay. And imagine in VR, you could actually set it up in VR and be even more crazy. Right.
I mean, this happens all the time.
Right.
And you know that like people will torture characters in video games all the time.
Yes, but usually it's within a context, unless you're actually maybe a little on the spectrum.
Maybe, but
like I'll give you an example.
In sandbox games, like in what's Sin City? What's the
Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto. There are people.
I couldn't do it.
Yeah, neither could I. But there are lots of people who can. But
there's no stakes. They're not real.
Right. And the argument could be made that you and I are silly for caring because it is just ones and zeros. Who cares?
So that's why I was fascinated by that question. And it relates to this because in this, I felt the rage that he felt when he comes home and his civilization was destroyed. And in reality, there's been video game rage incidents from much lower things. Like there's stories where the one brother ripped out the controller while the brother was playing. The brother was so pissed off he went and got a gun and shot his brother dead. These things happen. I'm not saying these are good, of course. These are horrible. But in that moment, I felt the rage. I'm like, because these little cute little creatures were being tortured viciously by this guy. And so when he comes home, now in his case, he had the hallucinations of realizing that these were real beings. So it's even worse, right? Because he's like, he's killing real beings. I just found it so effective. So for all these reasons, for me, this was a very interesting and effective. Now, I had two main complaints.
But let's take a break.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, back from the break. Two complaints.
Complaints.
What are
Complaint number one. Why was the cop so angry with him?
Yeah.
They've already got him in. It was so cliche.
It was cartoonish.
Like, it's like, well, you did. I'm like, dude, what?
Yeah.
Okay, that took me out of the suspension. The second
like
one.
the worst cop ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually the other one, the therapist was like trying to listen. By the way, didn't ask any interesting questions. So I was bothered with that whole interrogation thing. But the second thing was, why didn't the little Thronglets, did they not know about cloud computing? Like, I get that initially in the mid-90s, maybe not. But by the 2000s, why was
Actually, I think this is even further in the future of that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they start putting their code in cloud computers? And then they're distributed throughout the internet, way more resilient than someone's bedroom.
Well, hand wave, but the premise was that, I guess by that point, the computing power was mainly in the control of the government, which had a firewall that the Thronglets couldn't get past.
Right, but we didn't get there was no indication that they had gone cloud and had to uncloud. It just seemed like it was always in his bedroom. I just thought that because they showed
but that was the implication that
yeah,
he had heard, or as part of the collective, they had tried to use the available computing power of accessible internet stuff, which is kind of silly because if you could hack into the computing power of the entire world,
you could do. Yeah. So that was the one thing.
But
and obviously this is kind of like the,
but let's say
honorable mention,
like 10, 20 years from now, the government has a monopoly on the extreme computing power that would be necessary for the Thronglets to do what they're doing.
Well, at the very least, clearly he had money because he kept buying all that shit. At the very least, you would want geographic redundancy rather than putting all your eggs in one room basket. But my honorable mention for my gripes of wrath with this one was that the technology did get a little magical towards the end as well, because all of a sudden now you show the thing, it takes over all the computers, and now you do a sound, and now all the humans are controlled. I was like, okay, that was a little silly. But because of all the other stuff, I was so, and I like that whole, like, the universe it created with Bandersnatch and kind of like spiritually following with this one. I'm in. I like it.
Yeah, maybe a more believable conceit would have been, and it wouldn't have the climax, and it would be boring, but once it has access to the more powerful computers, it slyly starts to influence everyone to start playing that game. Yeah. And then through that game, it very slowly rewrites people's brain power.
I love it. I mean, look at the end of The Matrix. The Matrix ends with Neo talking to the Matrix saying, but now I know, and now we know, now we're coming after it. And it doesn't like get super magical at the end. It's just like, oh, he's going to start fighting. And then it leaves it up to the imagination.
You're talking about Matrix 1.
Yeah, that's all I'm talking about. Matrix 1. So anyways, I'm never going to defend my 9 for this one. I fully endorse your 5 and stuff. It was one of those like perfect square fit in my square hole.
Right. So that's why, like when we were talking about Hotel Reverie,
right?
And you and I love Casablanca and we love these old movies. Right. But if you've been one of those people who just loved watching, stepping in, So this episode I gave a 5 out of 10 because the cultural totems that were placed along the way were mildly interesting to me. Like the way the computer looked, the way that the game looked. It reminded me of Civ 1 and 2 when I played in the 90s. I loved Civ 1 when it came out. I couldn't believe how perfect that game was, and I still play I haven't played Civ 7, but because from the looks of it, it looks just like Civ 6.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Civ hasn't really changed much past maybe 3 or 4, which is good in some ways because it's like they haven't completely gone off the rails. But
did you ever play Alpha Centauri?
Yep.
I love that game.
I wasn't as much of a fan of that.
I wonder if it's because I never played the Civ games, but I played that one.
Yeah, it was just kind of like Civ in space.
It was a spin-off, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a good game, but I was like, this isn't different enough for me to care. But so there's that, and then the cartoonish cop was annoying, and then I don't know. It was interesting, 5 out of 10, and I was on board. And then the way it sort of revealed itself at the end, like I just wasn't really connecting with anyone. I didn't care. There wasn't a connection for me.
I can understand that.
And so, we're supposed to be following Cameron, our protagonist.
Right.
And I don't know. And then all of a sudden, boom, it did come out of the blue. It's like, oh my God, everyone is now part of the throng.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I agree.
Okay,
It is.
Now, but it does raise some interesting questions about this. We'll never know. And there's real world analogies to taking away freedoms for the benefit of society and the individual.
Yeah.
Like the one I always think about is, because I'm old enough to remember this transition, was in Washington State. For a long time, it wasn't illegal to not wear your seatbelt. Then in late 80s, early 90s, it became illegal.
Right.
And I didn't like it because although I did wear my seatbelt, I thought you can't force us to do something that's beneficial to us. I don't like,
because it's not saving someone else's life; it's your own. Yeah.
I should be able to make a choice. And this is kind of a slippery slope. Like, what are you going to do? It's just like prohibition or something, or making cigarettes illegal, or making it illegal for me to have high sugary foods or something. Like, you can't do that. It doesn't make any sense. Now, it's really hard for me to even remember how I felt back then because now I'm totally used to it.
Well, and I suppose you can make a utilitarian argument of like, it's too costly for society to have to deal with too many people dying of unnecessary accidents, plus costs of like paralyzed, blah, blah, blah. Like you could see an argument from that angle that's like, nah, sorry, but we can't afford it.
So alcohol is illegal. High fatty foods are illegal
to some extent, right? Like so,
exercise is mandatory.
Well, to some extent. So you're like, to
some extent. That's
well,
exactly
meaning
what
like you can't serve after this time. You can't serve minors. You can't serve more if they appear intoxicated. You can't serve them. So to some extent.
Well, for that, they're trying to reduce drunk driving, right? At least that's an argument that could be made,
right?
But anyway, so my point is that there are infinite examples of this in our society and other societies. And it's a very American dilemma because among various different societies around the world, we have a streak, presumably, about individual freedoms. And that plays itself out in some good ways and some bad ways. Like freedom of the press, which is much broader than it is in other societies around the world, and there's a different sense of it, and there's pros and cons to freedom, to extreme freedom of the press. Whereas in societies like the UK, they have freedom of the press as well, but there's a lot greater ability for people to sue people if you say bad things about people. Whereas in the United States, it's a completely different system, about libel and that kind of stuff. And so you have that tension there, and so freedom of the press we can get behind, but then you also have like freedom to own arms. There's different political stances and different ideas about it. So this idea of for your own good, people of the world, us thronglets, this AI is going to take away your impulse for conflict, for harm, for violence, for death, and we're going to make it so that you will be, and I guess it wasn't clear exactly what would happen after the great thronglet singularity moment at the end of the episode, but the sense I got was that everyone around the world would no longer want to kill. It wasn't like they'd be prevented. It's just that they no longer needed it. But the trade-off to that is they weren't entirely themselves. They weren't entirely their own agent. They didn't entirely have free will. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, which is, I think, why the implication was that the creator sort of saw that that's where it was going to head and then changed his tune from this is beautiful to, oh no, this will destroy us all. Okay, never mind, I need to end this. But it is tricky, right? Because like from one perspective, our bias, our human bias, is to be like, no, we want human society to continue how it does work well for me, because that's what I like as a human. So if I have freedom and I can enjoy my life, I want that to continue. From a different perspective, if you step outside from the human perspective, you could ask questions like, what benefits the most creatures on this planet? Or what could ensure survival of intelligent life more broadly in the universe? Actually, yeah, no, we need a collective, blah, blah, blah.
But you also don't have to step that far outside of yourself.
Yeah.
For me, if I could sacrifice that part, depending on what that would be like, but as long as it wasn't too intrusive or bothersome, so that I could know that literally every human around the world would no longer be violent,
right? Yeah.
Then absolutely, I would take that trade-off.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, like you're saying, it depends. I guess it depends on what's the deal we're striking here, right? I think, okay, so one in my mind, trivial version of this would be the AI advances enough to where the point, it's like kind of like an alien race descending, but let's call it the AI. The AI says, oh, we finally understand the human brain. We actually have a way to make it so that there's no psychopathy, there's no murderous streaks, there's no sadism that will murder people, whatever. We have a way to make humans. You'll have a range of different personalities, likes, dislikes. Some people will be a little ruder than others, but no extremes in that sense. And we could just do that, and but sign me up. Let's do it. I like it. But can I still live in my house? Oh yeah. Can I have my family? Yeah. Do I feel love? Yeah. Great. But then where it gets nuanced is like, basically where you are severe. The more you limit that experience and the freedoms, then selfishly as a human, I go, oh, wait, no, I don't want to lose all that stuff. And where that threshold is a good question.
So let's take a break, and then I have one more question for you.
All right.
All right, back from the break. So when you were watching this episode, were you just in total 9 out of 10 giddiness?
In a way, yes, because it's just so personal to me. I also, when you and I were playing in a band, the other thing I was doing at the time is I was creating a version of Thronglets that I was trying to create. I was trying to create a version of Thronglets. It wasn't called Thronglets. I didn't know what it was. It was nowhere near as advanced, of course. But I had this idea, right? The idea was, okay, so my general hypothesis was this. Because of Helen Keller, as an example, I had examples of a human that had what you could definitely call a human experience, but where it didn't include sight, it didn't include sound. So it included very, very narrow senses compared to what, quote, normal human experiences.
Wait, you've lost me. Start over.
Remember Helen Keller, the story of Helen Keller?
Yeah.
She was blind and deaf.
Yeah.
Okay, but we would still call her human, right?
Yeah.
And we imagine that she had a human experience going on in her brain.
Yeah.
Right. But without sight and sound, right?
Right.
So because of that, I came to the conclusion, I was like, oh, right. So when we think of having to create a simulation to simulate consciousness and awareness and all these things, we think, oh yeah, and we got to have like photorealism and all this. But I'm like, I don't think so. I think you could scale it way down. Now, how far down is a good question. So my thing was, I was going to create essentially the smallest possible entities that could accept signal, like input, and then learn and grow from that input. But I wanted to like dial it down to the minimum. So essentially, the reason I'm calling them Thronglets is because they were going to be like, in my mind, these little teeny little digital organisms, I guess, that have a life cycle, have a basic need, can sense in a sense, and then they grow and multiply and blah, blah, blah. What they don't do until now with AI is they don't learn on their own. So like all the AI before, at the time and all that stuff, you have to program the AI. You have to say, okay, rule one, if then statement. If this happens, then you do this. If this happens, then you do this.
I mean, I don't know when it started, and I don't know if this counts, but I watch YouTube videos of people for, 10 years that have some sort of software that you can create neural networks.
Yeah, in the 1950s is when that started. Yeah. But no one was doing that. Nothing existed. No one was using video cards for doing it. It was like, when I say no one, it's like, sure, university labs were underfundedly trying to keep that process alive. It wasn't until some key developments happened with AlexNet and a couple other things where anyone started paying any attention. And the bottom line is that I still think that's interesting. So when I was watching this show, I was like, oh, that's so cool. Because, if you think about it, if in the 90s someone had actually been putting together something like that, they would have potentially been decades ahead in going in the direction that we're going now. So, I don't know. I was just geeking out so much over it. Now, of course, in reality, the computer power at the time wouldn't have actually been able to do what they were seemingly doing, right? But, whatever. So, to me, I was, from beginning to end, even with the complaints I had, I was in geek out mode. And that's why I was giddy and enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that I thought of because in the very beginning of the episode, they show his computer with all these like video cards that are hanging from the ceiling, all connected, right?
Yeah.
And later in the episode, when we start piecing together what we saw earlier in the episode, I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe you could construct some kind of networked, cobbled together computer that could do that, but wouldn't it be limited by the bus of the transfer of data between these different nodes? Like that would be the bottleneck of each individual hardware piece, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Especially back then.
So I'm not dumb
but
for thinking
then
that.
you could also, what do you call it? You could explain some of that away in that the length of computation of these thronglets could be longer than the human computation length. Meaning, how long it takes for one frame of existence could be longer than one frame of existence for us. And you could still have a thriving ecosystem of creatures. But they made it look like, no, these were pretty real-time creatures. They were reacting in real time. So, it was a little bit hand-wavy. Also, the Throng, when it gets kind of complex, it was acting pretty advanced. It was like doing...
Well, kind of yes and no, because if I wasn't knowledgeable of the story that I was being told, and I just saw this wave through thousands of little thronglets on a screen, I wouldn't have thought it was a complicated.
That's fair. Yeah, I guess there is that. So I guess the main distinction is this, because you were saying like, weren't people doing this or doesn't it exist? Here's what didn't exist, for sure, not in the 90s, but even in 2008. What happens is that when you have signals coming in, you as in humans, us, our brain is dynamically adjusting itself to react and learn from those signals, right? Which is what now AI is doing to a certain extent. But this idea of reinforcement learning with no pre-existing manual was really not in existence. This guy I mentioned, Demis Hassabis, one of the big things that they started doing, if you will remember, right around 2014 roughly, they started doing this thing where they would play classic games like Atari games, and they would have the AI without any rules learn from just playing and playing and playing and playing. That was reinforcement learning. Theoretically, someone had written a paper, I'm sure, in the 70s or whatever. No one had really done it. The computers couldn't do it. So all that was still pretty new. If someone had actually done that in the 90s, it would have been black magic. But that's why I was so intrigued. I was like, oh, this is cool. And it had that Black Mirror-ness of it, which is you dial it up a little bit. Now, again, I agree, towards the end, it gets a little...
Yeah, maybe a better way to end it for me, that would have bumped it up to 6 or 7 out of 10, would have been... Because the whole episode, you're wondering, is this guy crazy?
Right.
Because if you, again, just look at the game... Mm-hmm. It's not complicated. It's just this, and we also know that he's been taking all this acid.
That's right.
So there's been no confirmation that the computer is actually talking to him.
That's a good point.
And if they just, he's like, okay, it's about to happen. It's going to reprogram everyone's mind. And they place enough, I don't know, little seeds along the way, breadcrumbs, to make us think, maybe he isn't crazy.
Right.
And then they just end the episode before the sound goes off.
I love it. And you could even do like a couple of things that someone could catch and say like, oh, I think it did happen because of these little things. I like that a lot because, first of all, it then doesn't have to explain what tech happens for the human. It doesn't even get into that. You just know that if you've been following along and you believe him, something big's about to happen. And if you don't believe him, da, da, da.
Yeah. He says
Yeah.
it's about to
I
happen,
like it.
and then they
Yeah.
look at him like, huh?
I like
he says it's going to send a subsonic
Right.
reprogramming. You won't even know what's going to happen.
know.
It
Yeah.
just happened. We've
Yeah.
all joined the throng.
That's right.
And it's going to save the world.
You know, I think one of the themes is the more subtlety, the more I like it. In general, for a lot of these things.
Yeah. But I think it would piss off a lot of people.
It probably would, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, the other theme that I wrote down in my notes that isn't very complicated is the Tamagotchi phase of the 90s.
Oh, how I didn't bring that up. That's a great point. And that was every little kid had these little plastic,
Essentially a handheld video game.
which is a living creature that they train and feed and
Right. That had no goals.
yeah, and it had very little actual AI or anything.
Very Japanese, very
Yeah.
very cutesy, but
That's
also
true.
yeah. And also how it is a harbinger of isolation through video games
That's a
and
good
video
point.
games becoming your friends.
And the Thronglets actually, now that I think about it, they look like little Tamagotchis in a way. Yeah.
They do?
The design of them. It's
So this is one critique I had, which is that, you and I played video games in the 90s.
Right.
And although the world of that video game could have existed in the
legit.
90s, the characters were the resolution was too high.
yeah, the animation and then the sound and all that. Yeah, but
Okay, so did you notice?
yeah.
I'm like,
well, that's what I was referring to when I said.
I'm like they're doing a great job by keeping it true to the tech of the time, but those little characters, they look too good.
Well, that's what I meant when I said that once it became a throng and it was moving around the screen, that wouldn't have been possible at the time.
But even just the individual,
Even the individuals, yes.
I was like, that looks too good.
Yeah.
That's too cute.
Yes.
There's too many pixels.
too many frames per animation, too high resolution. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because
I agree.
we're still in like the Nintendo 2 era or the Super Nintendo era.
If you go back and play Diablo 2 in the original resolution, it's a pixelated mess.
and that's like early 2000s. Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So absolutely. You're totally right.
Okay. I'm glad that I'm not an idiot in that way. Well, wow. I would not have thought that you would have thought this episode was a 9 out of 10.
Yeah. It was one of those unique fits.
Well, the next episode I gave a 10 out of 10, but we'll have to wait to talk about that. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
You deserve it.